I'm going to show you how to create this Iman Gadzhi 3D roadmap. We haven't done an Iman Gadzhi in a while, so I'm really excited about this one. And by the way, if you want to become a pro editor and earn 2 to 5K a month with editing, then join the Social Creator Club Pro. Link is in the description and you will learn where to find clients, how to get these clients. And there's hours of lessons on editing, including Iman Gadzhi's deep dives, but also an interview with an editor of Iman Gadzhi. Anyway, let's jump into it. So first we have these really cool map icons. It zooms out and then it will fill this line. This line will follow along with these squares pop up. Then it zooms in and it goes to the last point here. Really cool animation. Now I'm first gonna create a new composition, just a preset Ultra HD 4K 25 frames per second. Let's call this city map. There we go. Now I already have a vector of a city here. I can just drag that in, scale it down, and if you want to download this, you can download this completely for free if you join the Social Creator Club Lite. This is a free community where I share my assets. So I'm gonna scale this down a bit by pressing S, and we need to move it a bit also. There we go. Now first I'm gonna stylize this a bit. So I'm gonna add a brightness and contrast. I'm gonna decrease the brightness to -150 and increase the contrast. And then we're gonna add a tint to this. So just type in tint. And then I'm gonna change the white to like a darker gray. So I'm gonna make it this. So it's a bit more subtle. It's a bit more in the background. That's cool. Now, of course, we're going to create the elements first, starting with those cool map icons. So I'm just going to go to the rounded rectangle tool by holding my mouse down onto this square. Now the fill I'm going to set to linear gradient, press OK, and then go into this fill and then going to change this to maybe something like green yellowish to a more like a lighter blue. Okay, I'm just gonna drag this and hold shift to scale it proportionally. And then you have the roundness here on the side. I'm gonna increase that by a lot, something like this. And if you can't see this, you can also go into the rectangle and find it here. Now make sure you got the selection tool, click on the gradient fill, and then we can change this gradient. I'm gonna drag this out a bit and also make it a bit more smooth, maybe something like this. There we go. Now to make the circle inside, I'm just gonna duplicate this by pressing Command D on Mac or Control D on Windows. Then I'm gonna click on fill. I'm gonna set this to a solid color. Okay, click on the fill and then eyedropper tool and let's select the background color. Okay, now I'm gonna increase the roundness by a lot. So this will become a circle. Now that's cool, we have our base effect. Now the only thing I'm gonna do is add a circle in the center. And the easiest way to do this is to just open the contents, then duplicate this rectangle by pressing Command D, Control D on Windows. Then I'm gonna open this, I'm gonna open the rectangle path, I'm gonna size this down first of all. And then I'm just gonna change the fill to a yellow color, maybe something like this. Okay, it's cool. So now we have our first map icon, right? It's way too big, but we can rescale it later on. Now let's rescale this a bit so it's a bit smaller so we can start with our line animation. I'm just gonna link this to our shape layer 1. I'm gonna call this dot by pressing enter and this map icon. And if we now press S and scale this down, this will scale with it. Perfect. Now I can also animate this. For example, what I always like to do is press S for scale, set a keyframe for rotation, press U to see our keyframes, and then dragging these out by a lot. So maybe even like 2 seconds in or something. Then setting the rotation to -90, the scale to 0, and make sure this motion blur is set to on both layers. I'm gonna select both these keyframes and hit F9 or right click, keyframe assistant and then easy ease. As you can see, we have these values if we go to the graph editor, and then we can select these last two. I'm gonna drag this to the left, and I'm also gonna select these two and drag this to the left too. So it's like really sloped, and then it will smooth it. And if we play this now, we already have a really nice smooth animation, right? I love that. That's nice. And then of course, later on, we can just select these, duplicate it, and have multiple of these icons. Now for the line, we can just go to the pen tool, make sure the fill is set to none, and then the stroke is set to maybe like a grayish color, something like that. 10 pixels should be fine. And I'm just gonna set the first point here. And then hold space down to navigate around. We can now set our next point here by clicking and then holding your mouse down. And then we're gonna make these really long handles to make it a bit more smooth. And again here, maybe like maybe something like here. You can always adjust this later on, right? Just needs to be a bit more playful. Drag this one out and something like here. There we go. So we have our first shape. That's cool. I actually like the line width maybe a bit further, maybe set it to 14. It's a bit more thick. That's cool. Now what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna open this shape. Then I open the contents, and then I'm gonna duplicate this shape by pressing Command D. And then I'm gonna go to this shape and add a gradient stroke. And then we can even delete this stroke by selecting it and hitting delete. Then go into the gradient stroke. Make sure the stroke width is set to the same width as the other stroke, which was set to 14. So I'm also going to set this to 14. There we go. As you can see, we have a stroke now over it. I'm just going to go to edit gradient, and I'm going to edit this gradient a bit. So we can just add a couple of steps. You can make these any colors you like. So you can just click it on this color, change this to red, for example, or maybe like a bluish, and then we're going to use a bit of the same color. There we go. Press OK. So we have our gradient. Now you have a start and end point. Basically what this does is it will set where the gradient is. And as you can see, our gradient is really at this center now. So we need to drag that out a bit. And I just do that by just changing these points. But you can also go to the selection tool and click on the gradient stroke. And then you will see these handles. And you can really like drag these out a bit, something like this. And as you can see, there's a really cool gradient on this stroke, which is exactly what we want. Now, what I do want to do is add a trim paths. Just make sure that this is on this shape too. So go to add trim paths. Make sure you have the shape 2 selected. And what's cool now is if we go into this trim paths and we animate the end, it will just animate the gradient stroke that we created. So we can just set a keyframe on the endpoint, drag this out and set this to 0 here. I'm also going to go back to our shape 1 and I'm going to make sure that this is a bit darker, not too dark, but something like this, so there's a bit more contrast. Okay, so if I would now play it, as you can see, the stroke will be filled with this cool gradient stroke, right? We can also add motion blur by clicking on motion blur. We'll make it a bit more smooth. And of course, we can also press U to see our keyframes, selecting these keyframes and hitting F9, or right click, keyframe assistant, easy ease. This will make it a bit more smooth, and I always like smooth. It's a really cool effect that you can also use in other projects, right? Now, I'm not the biggest fan of this angle here. I'm probably going to change that later on. If you do want to change this path, you can just select this shape layer, go to the pen tool, and then you can just move these around. Or go to the selection tool, double clicking on this path, selecting a point, and then, for example, we can just make our selection here by dragging this out and moving this. This is important because we do want to adjust both paths. I'm gonna make this a bit more smooth, right? Something like this. Cool. Now I'm gonna move this below our map icon so it comes out of this. I'm gonna select both the dot and the map icon by holding Shift and then just duplicating this by pressing Command D, Control D on Windows. And I'm just gonna move this, and then I'm just gonna make sure I only have this map icon 2 selected, and then I can just move this to here. So we have our endpoint. Now I'm gonna add these small squares on the path, and you can do this by just going to the rectangle tool by holding your mouse down, clicking and holding your mouse down. Then I'm gonna set the fill to solid color, okay? And I'm gonna set the fill to like an off-white. I always like to not go fully white because it can be quite harsh, maybe something like this, okay? And then of course, make sure nothing is selected. Drag this out, hold Shift. We have this ugly stroke, so click on stroke and set this to none, okay? So we have our square. We can also go to V for selection, moving this around a bit. And of course, these need to be animated too. I'm just gonna use the same principle. So with an R of rotation, setting a keyframe, dragging this out, and an S for scale, dragging this out and setting this to 0 and pressing R for rotation. I'm gonna set this to probably also -90, it should work. Now press U to see our keyframes. We do need to align this a bit, so it's basically doing this at the same time. And as you might notice, it scales from the wrong anchor point. I don't like that, so we need to change that. Basically, you need to go to the pen behind anchor tool. Then we can just move this point. And if you hold Command, it will snap into place, Control on Windows. And now it should scale from the center. There we go. Perfect. Of course, add motion blur, and of course, easy ease these keyframes by hitting F9 or right clicking keyframe assistant. Again, I'm gonna select these last parts. I'm gonna drag this out, and you can go to this view by clicking the graph editor. Just selecting the first part, I'm gonna do the same, dragging this to the left so it goes really quick and then smooth, right? Now the key here is to time this well. So basically when this gradient is almost here, then we pop this up. So I'm already gonna change the timing a bit. First I'm gonna move the first icon, so map icon and dot, one frame to the left. So it basically starts out like this and it scales up. And then once it's around here, I want the gradient to start. So let's select our first shape layer, and we can also rename this by hitting enter, calling this line, okay? Then press U to see our keyframes, and let's drag this out so it starts around here. Maybe we can even start it a bit earlier because it will take some time anyway. There we go, nice and smooth. And then once it's around here, we'll just select our square, and I'm gonna move these keyframes. And if you don't see these keyframes, press U. I'm gonna drag this out to here. So it's like popping up once it's there, right? Cool. Now, of course, we can do this a couple times. I also think this square is a bit too big now looking at it. So I'm just gonna scale it down a bit. Make sure you're on the keyframe, by the way, on the last keyframe. Go. That's cool. Now I can just duplicate this by pressing Command D, Control D on Windows, and then just moving this around. Just making sure the timing is correct, right? So once it's here, I'm gonna press U to see our keyframes, and we can even just move this layer so it starts scaling up once the line is there. Then we also need to change the timing of the last one. So I'm just gonna select these both, and I'm just gonna drag this to the right so it starts around here. Zoom in a bit, and let's also move these. So I'm just gonna make sure I only have map icon 2 selected. I'm just gonna hit the arrow keys to center this a bit. So basically once it's almost there, this pops up, right? Cool. Now this is cool, but as you can see, it's really static. So I want to animate this, and the best way to do this is with a camera. So we're gonna basically do like a 3D movement, maybe even with some shallow depth of field. So the first thing to do is make everything 3D. So I'm just gonna select all these 3D icons. That's cool. And go to Layer, New, Camera. Then I'm just gonna change this to a one node camera. Press OK. Now make sure your renderer is set to classic 3D, not advanced 3D. Then we're gonna open the camera, open the transform, and then I'm just gonna set a keyframe for the position. Then I'm gonna zoom in first. Let's zoom in a lot, and let's move it to the left. You can also hold shift to make it go quicker, and let's move it a bit to the bottom. So we're basically just at this center point, right? And I'm also gonna use the X rotation to add a bit of depth to our map. Not too much, maybe something like 6 or 7 degrees. That's cool. And we might have to scale the map a bit. As you can see, it's cut off here. Just press S for scale and then unlink this. And I'm actually gonna stretch it a bit. There we go. And we might have to stretch it a bit later on to make it fill the whole canvas. Now what we're gonna do is basically just follow the gradient a bit, right? So I'm just gonna go a bit further, and then let's just move this keyframe around. So you can just drag it like this, then move it more to the right. There we go. And going a bit further, let's hold shift again and drag it more to the right. And then once it's here, let's go a bit further and let's move this down. There we go. So we now have our first path, but this will be really harsh and not smooth at all. And we like smooth, right? And the best way to smooth this all is just to right click on this, keyframe interpolation, and then we're gonna set the temporal interpolation to Bezier and the spatial interpolation also to Bezier. Press OK. And now we have a really smooth animation. As you can see, it goes a bit too quick in my opinion, so we can slow it down. I think if we slow it down to like 5 seconds, it would work a bit better. So I'm just gonna click on the camera. I'm gonna select all these keyframes, hold Alt and then drag this out. And then it will basically scale these keyframes. Now we just go to our line, press U for our line, and also drag this line out. And then let's see if this works. Now what we can do is go to the position and click the graph editor and selecting this keyframe. And let's just like smooth this out a bit, setting this to 0. There we go. And it will basically ramp up and it will go a bit quicker here. And then also at the last keyframe, just select this, drag this down, and also ease this a bit. Now, as you can see, there's quite a big bump here. Basically, we'll just slow down a bit here. And I don't want that. I want it to continuously go through. So the best way to do this is to just select this, hold Alt, and then drag this up. As you can see, you will drag both points up, and then just make sure there's not like a big valley here. Just make sure that it's like continuous. You can even drag this out a bit, something like this. And as you can see, it will be way smoother and it will slow down at the end. And same goes for this one. We can just select this, hold Alt, and drag this up. I'm still not the biggest fan of this part. I think this goes a bit too harsh, and we can also adjust the path of the camera. And you can do this by just going to the active camera, clicking there and setting it to front. And here we can see our path. And as you can see, there's also these handles. So we can literally just change the path of our animation. So for example, if I go out of the graph editor, I select this keyframe, it will also be selected in our viewport, and we can drag this path to something really weird like this. And the best way to change these is to go into the convert vertex tool, because then if we now drag this out, both handles will be changed. We can make it really weird, like this, for example. And basically what it will do, as you can see, the camera will follow it, and then it will go more to the right. But basically I want to just adjust it a tiny bit, not too much, but just so it's a bit more smooth, right? Going back to the active camera, and that already looks so much better. Now I'm gonna add some blur to this, to the side. So I'm just gonna go to Layer, New, Adjustment Layer, go to Effects and Presets, and add a Gaussian blur to this. Then I'm gonna turn this up to maybe something like 60 or 70. And then I'm just gonna go into the ellipse tool, drag a circle like this, something like this, then setting this to subtract and hitting F for feather and setting this to 100. And this will basically add a bit of blur on the sides. You will definitely see it here. It will just add a bit of like depth to it. If you want, you can even go into this mask and change the expansion, dragging that down. Or we can, of course, double click on the mask and maybe adjusting it a bit so it's a bit more harsh on the sides. I'm also going to increase the feather a bit to maybe feather it a bit to like 200. That's cool. And as you can see, especially here, it creates this really cool effect, right? And then you will get something like this. And as you can see, I think it's such a cool effect. Again, you can use this line animation in a lot of projects. Leave a comment of what you want to see next. And if you want to become a pro editor, then do join the Social Creator Club Pro. Link is in the description. Don't forget to subscribe. And then, of course, thanks for watching. See you next time. Bye.